So I've been with Cygnet about 7 months, and I joined as the consultant neuropsychiatrist at Cygnet House, which is a female neuropsychiatry neuro rehabilitation unit in Middlesbrough in Colby Newham. And part of the reason I joined here was because it's a brand new hospital. So very exciting time to join because you get to set up a new service. And it's not often you get that opportunity to build something from scratch. And I'm also the medical lead, we get called medical directors, for neuropsychiatry in the north of England. So that was another kind of interesting element to the role.
Well, my career is a little bit longer with the company. This is now I'm into my 9th year at the company. I've worked in a number of different services. I think I've probably done some work in at least 15 different hospitals, but I've primarily, for the first 5 years, I took care of 2 hospitals as consultant psychiatrist and medical lead in male rehab initially. Then I went to female rehab for 2 years, and I now work in personality disorder, female personality disorder rehab as consultant psychiatrist, but I'm also the medical director for female rehab services in the north. So I've been around and worked in all the different services. I suppose that's a big reason for me being here today. I've actually worked for the company for a long while.
Well, I originally went into medicine because it just sounded like a good, stable job. But then you get the opportunity to experience different specialties. And psychiatry always appealed to me because you got the opportunity to speak to people more than you did in any other specialty, really. It's all about speaking to people and observing them, and it's all about clinical skills. You don't have very much reliance on investigations. And if you're nosy, if you like talking to people, then it's great because you're in such a privileged position because you are expected to, not just allowed, you're expected to ask questions about people's lives and to understand why what they're experiencing is happening to them right now at this time, and to understand what they're going through. And obviously, having trained as a doctor, that's great, but why don't you go be a psychologist? I also enjoy the medical side of it, which is why I chose to do a lot of training in liaison psychiatry and neuropsychiatry. And for the first 7 or 8 years of my consultant career, I was a liaison psychiatrist. But the downside of that is, as a liaison psychiatrist, your input with people is often brief. So you see people maybe for a couple of hours, if you're lucky, in the emergency department, and a couple of days often on the medical wards. And then once you've done all of that hard work, understanding what's happening, formulating it, you hand it to somebody else. So you often don't see then what flows from that. So one of the reasons I chose to come to neuropsychiatry with Cygnet is because you then get the opportunity in a subspecialty which isn't very common to be able to be with people and stay with people throughout their journey. And in rehabilitation, as I'm sure Logan will experience, you get to focus on that restoration of function, or being able to then discharge them to an environment where they're much more able to function to their maximum kind of ability.
I don't think I've ever wanted to do anything else but be a doctor for as long as I can remember. But psychiatry came more by accident than design. So I'm originally trained in South Africa in my basic medical skills, and came over after the internship year to see a bit of the world, and arrived in England, and psychiatry locums were easier to get into at that time in 1997. So I sort of almost accidentally fell into psychiatry, but feel like I found what I was probably looking for when I chose to be a doctor. And it was all about getting to know people. it sometimes feels like, and I always think back to my days as a crisis and home treatment team consultant psychiatrist. You'd literally be sitting in somebody's lounge having a cup of tea, gossiping about their lives. But in effect, what you're doing is you're doing this very detailed clinical assessment. But it does just feel like you're having a bit of a gossip about their lives. And you kind of just piecing things together, and you're kind of a bit like a detective almost. A little bit of that, and let's follow that trail. Let's go there. Let's see where it's going. And so, I did crisis and home treatment for 10 years, but it was a very stressful job, and you didn't always get to know the patients as well as you wanted to, because really within 2-3 weeks you were done with what you needed to do. And I came to rehab. I think it's kind of that more in-depth knowledge, knowing the patients backwards and forwards. And I always, when I'm training my own team and new MDT members, I always say, when we talk to our customers, the care coordinators, we should know this patient better than them, even if they've known the patient for 10 years. But we've been living with them 24/7 for the last 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. We should be able to tell a different story, and tell that story in a way that's exciting, that sort of builds the patient up from where they started, but also kind of gets them to that next level and taking them to the next level. We see people coming in and they're at their kind of worst at times when we've seen them. They're on their 15th, 20th admission, and then you kind of trying to turn that round to no future admissions, or if they're admitted, to shorter ones. And you're working with the family, you're working with the patient. And the thing I love most about what we do at Cygnet, I'm not alone in what I do. When I worked in the NHS, what I found was I was referring to the psychologist. I was referring for an OT assessment. And even with my nursing team, is quite often I was going out, and sometimes in dangerous situations, to patients' home on my own. I was being sent out to all sorts of places, day and night, to see people. But we're working with an MDT, with an on-site psychologist, an OT, the nursing team, a group of therapists as we are, that we sort of enhance each other's skills in what we're doing. And every day there's a conversation that you go, I've learned something. That's really, really critical. That's so good. I've learned that. And every day is a learning experience at Cygnet. There's never a day that goes by I can say I didn't learn anything from my team or my patients. And that's such an important part of the job. And I love it. I just love the fact that every day is an education. And I have to keep up to date. I'm now probably the oldest member in my MDT. And, you've got people who are sort of 23, 24 walking to the team. So my CPD has got to be bang on and, the expectations. But leading the team, I think as a consultant psychiatrist, clinical leadership, I love that aspect of what we do. I love it. It's guiding the younger nurses and OTs and psychologists and doctors, and seeing them through and helping them develop into becoming the leaders they want to be, helping them become the practitioners they want to be, while I'm learning from them as well. So I think that there's so many things I could go on about, but I love what I do at Cygnet, and it's why I've stayed for this is my 9th year.
I recognise a lot of that, particularly with the psychiatry thing, about the skill of the assessment in being able to turn it into a conversation. It shouldn't feel like an interview, or like someone's being interrogated, or that like you're being asked a list of questions. That's how you know that you have achieved a certain level of clinical skills, when it just turns into a chat. But you're hitting all of those bases internally. You can have a checklist inside of your head, that's fine, but you know it so well that you can just have a natural, free-flowing conversation, tick things off as you're going, but it's not apparent to anybody that you're kind of collecting that information within a framework. And one of the things that I've been really impressed about with Cygnet is the quality of the MDT. And that was one of the things that I was a bit worried about coming from the NHS. It's very anxiety provoking leaving the NHS. When all you've ever known is the NHS, that's what you trained in, that's what you've had your consultant career in. It's about taking that leap, and it's a bit of a leap of faith. But Cygnet seems to have really, really good quality of the other disciplines within the MDT. So at Newham House, we've got speech and language therapist, physiotherapy, occupational therapy, consultant neuropsychologist, an assistant psychologist. I feel I'm forgetting people now, but it's a full MDT, which I've never worked with an MDT that has a physiotherapist with them. I've done neuropsychiatry jobs in the NHS, and they've not had physiotherapists with them or speech and language therapists.
It's interesting. I mean, I suppose I'm not being a suck up when I say this, but I always remember a conversation with Dr. Romero in that first year that I worked for the company, and he always said, you get the environment right, you get the right people, professionals in to work, and the care stuff becomes easy, and the patients will progress. It's the right environment, the right people, and everything else starts to just fall in place quite easily. And I always remember that conversation, and it's always stuck with me because that standard is always there. When I'm involved in recruitment myself, when I'm involved in looking at my hospital and how I'm involved in quality control, we're constantly thinking about this. We're constantly thinking about the quality of the people, the quality of our environment, because if you get those things wrong, doesn't matter. The patients are not going to succeed. They're not going to progress. And I think that's kind of what you're alluding to them at.
Yes. Yeah. But if you get the leadership right, and I think Cygnet enables you to lead as a consultant, then it allows you to develop and provide good quality services. Because Cygnet gives you that responsibility and that freedom. Whereas I know in other organisations I've worked with, you feel everybody knows what needs to happen, and there might be a quality improvement methodology in place, but it takes months, or it just doesn't happen, which is incredibly frustrating.